The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that in regards to kinyonim, acquisitions, there's a rule. Ein adam makne dover shalei balo olam, a person cannot transfer ownership on something that doesn't exist yet. And therefore, the din is that if a person sells the fruits of a palm tree to his friend before the fruit started growing, he could change his mind even after the fruits grew already, because at the time when he sold it, it didn't exist yet. The exception to this is if the person sold haguf lipeiroisov, if he sold the actual body of the thing, but not for the thing itself, but rather for the fruit or for the produce that's going to come out of it. So for example, in the case of a tree, he's selling the tree, but only as far as what's going to grow from the tree. He's not selling the tree, but he's selling the tree for the purpose of the fruit to the other person. Then the din is that that's not considered trying to transfer ownership of something that doesn't exist yet, because the actual tree or the body of whatever it is that we're selling does exist, and you are selling that as far as the peiros, the fruit that will come out of it. Says the Rambam that the din of hekdesh, the din of trying to give something to the Beis HaMikdash, or giving something to the poor, or if one made a neder, a vow about giving something, is not the same as when you're trying to give over something to an ordinary person. Meaning that if a person will say, anything that my animal will give birth to will be hekdesh, he's donating it to the Beis HaMikdash, or if he says, I'm going to give it to tzedakah, so then he does have to fulfill what he said. Because it says in regards to giving things over to Hashem, it says kechol hayoytz, in regards to making nedarim and the like, it says kechol hayoytz mipiv yaseh, that whatever he verbalizes, whatever he says he's going to do, whatever he vows he's going to do, he needs to do. In other words, even though in this case also the object did not exist yet, and therefore the hekdesh, giving it over to the Beis HaMikdash, cannot really apply it to the object, but there is an obligation on the person to fulfill what he said because of the concept of a neder, of a vow. The Rambam then actually continues and says, since this is the halacha, if a person, for example, would give a will before he passes away and says that anything that this tree is going to produce should go to the poor, so then the poor are considered that they actually were zoicha, it's theirs, they acquired it. The Rambam says the argoinim that argue on this and say, no, the aniyim, the poor people, are only able to zoicha, they're only able to acquire and get that which a regular ordinary person, the way a regular ordinary person would make an acquisition, make a kinyan, and therefore it cannot apply to something that doesn't exist yet, says the Rambam, but I don't agree to this. Because although it's true, a person does not have to give over his possessions to the poor or to other people, but a person is commanded to fulfill his promises, his words that he said in regards to tzedakah or hekdesh, just like he's commanded to fulfill his neder. The Rebbe now says that we discussed a number of times that every single halacha in Torah, in addition to its simple meaning, it's also a Torah meaning, it's also a lesson in spiritual avodah. To use the words of the Rambam himself, it's an eitzah, it's advice, it's a way of telling us how to behave in tikkun hadeyos, in fixing up our own character traits. The Rambam says that most of the dinim of the Torah are only eitzos l'sakein hadeyos or liyasher kol hamaisim, telling us how to behave, how to improve ourselves, how to refine our character traits. Says the Rebbe, the same thing applies in our case. The Rebbe is going to apply all of the dinim of kinyanim that we just mentioned in what that means in avodas Hashem. So number one, the difference between if you are selling the fruits of a tree that are going to grow, where we said you cannot really give that over, or if you're selling the tree for the sake of the fruits. Number two, the difference that the Rambam makes between an ordinary person acquiring things and the din bar kinyan is you don't have to give over your items, and therefore even if you said you're going to sell it, you don't have to. Whereas the din by hekdesh and poor, where a person is obligated to fulfill his words, and therefore he does have to fulfill what he said, even if it's something that does not exist yet. So all of these things apply in the ruchni, is the kavodah between Hashem and between a person and Hashem. So in order to explain this, the Rebbe first explains the general idea of kinyan in Avodas Hashem. The Rebbe says that our avodah generally is this concept of making a kinyan, meaning a yid is giving over, he's transferring ownership of himself and everything that he has to Hashem, meaning to say that in everything should be noticeable that he, the person himself, and everything that he owns is really within the ownership of Hashem. It all belongs to Hashem. How does one do this? By making sure that his conduct, his thought, speech, and action are always in accordance with the will of Hashem. The Rebbe says, in fact, that this is the wording, this is the diuk, the precise wording of Chazal, where they say, Ani nivreisi l'shamash es koini. Now what this means is that I'm created to serve Hashem. But the expression is koini, doesn't say boiri, my creator, koini like from the word of making a kinyan, the one who owns me. Because through serving Hashem, now is being carried out and is being revealed that Hashem is koini, is the one that owns the person and everything he has. This idea that a person is a full kinyan, belongs to Hashem, will be revealed in the biggest way, in the most complete way, la'asid levu when Mashiach comes, as it says, in fact, in regards to one of the promises of the Geula, uses this expression. By Yoimahu, Yosef Adnai, on that day, Hashem is once again going to liknois es sha'arami, to acquire the remainder of his nation. We also have an expression by Yetzias Mitzrayim. Amzu Konisa, we say this in Oz Yasher, the nation that you have acquired. So generally, this is our avodah, to make sure that we are transferring ownership, so to speak, of ourselves and our possessions to Hashem. Now, within this kinyan that a yid is giving to Hashem, there could be two ways how the yid is giving himself over to Hashem. One would be called kinyan haguf, which would be similar to like when you sell an item itself, selling the tree, for example. Or there could be kinyan hapeiros, where what you're giving over is just the produce, only the fruits of the tree. What is the difference in avodah, in ourselves? What is our guf and what is the peiros? So the guf would be the person's nefesh, the person's guf, his soul, his body, and all of their faculties, including the intellect of his mind, the emotions of the heart, the character traits, all of the different faculties, including thought, speech, and action. So that would be considered giving over the guf, giving over everything. Peiros would be just the activities that the person does, that he produces through his organs, through his limbs. And basically, this is mainly referring to the garments of the soul, his thought, speech, and action. As Chazal say, what are the fruits, what are the peiros of a tzaddik? Mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim. The things that he does, the good things that he does in mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim, which are the products, they grow out of the seichel and the midos and the koiches of the person. That's what comes out of his faculties. Says the Rebbe, so this would then be the difference of kinyan peiros, of acquiring just the fruit, or acquiring the guf, the actual body itself, the essence itself in avodah, in the person's service to Hashem. Kinyan peiros would mean, the acquisition of the fruits would mean that a yid is giving over to Hashem all of his thought, speech, and action. They are the fruits, they are the produce of the soul and all of its faculties and garments. Which means practically that he's absolutely 100% careful in every single aspect of his thought, speech, and action, that they should be 100% in accordance to the will of Hashem. As the expression of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in regards to the level of a Beinoni, he's a person that he never did an Aveira, he will never do an Aveira, he's never called a Rasha even for 1 hour, for 1 moment during his whole life. But that's only as far as the fruits, the product that comes out, the results. But what about the guf? What about the essence of the person himself, as far as the essence of his seichel, of his intellect, of his character traits, of his emotions, of his faculties? That was never given over completely to Hashem. Meaning to say, his mind and his heart were not freed from the possibility that he might have certain thoughts or certain bad midos and certain taivos, which get aroused in his heart and come to the mind. Of course, he's going to push them away. He has the ability to make sure that these midos, right, these bad midos and these taivos shouldn't come out and express themselves in thought, speech, and action, but they do come up in his in his feelings and in his mind. So that would all be kinyan peiros. What he gave over is his thought, speech, and action, but the actual seichel and midos themselves, the intellect, the emotions, the character traits were not given over to Hashem. What would kinyan haguf mean? This is the avodah of a tzaddik. He gives over to Hashem even the very essence of his seichel and his midos by being mevatel, by nullifying the very essence of his yetzer hara and the very essence of the seichel and the bad midos of his heart and of all of his faculties, to the extent that he only has desires for good and kedusha. Now, since he gave over the guf, the very essence of his seichel, the midos in his heart to Hashem, so then automatically the fruit, the thought, speech, and action are obviously given over to Hashem. He doesn't have to fight to do a certain act, not to do an act against the will of Hashem, whether it's in thought, speech, or action. Because by such a person, there is lechatchila no other desire and temptation in his heart for anything else. The Rebbe says this is in fact one of the explanations of why a tzaddik is called an eved Hashem. What is the idea of an eved, a servant, a slave? Because avdus is a concept where the guf, the very body of the eved, belongs to the master. And therefore automatically we say that anything that the slave, the servant owns, the master owns. This is similar to the avodah of the tzaddik, which had given over his very essence, his very body to Hashem, and therefore automatically everything else, the fruits, the results are going to be Hashem's. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand this concept of what we mean when we say, that a person cannot give over something that doesn't exist yet. For example, the fruits of that tree, the fruit of that date tree. In avodah Sodom, the Rebbe says, before someone that is not yet at the level of kinyan haguf, in other words, he's not a tzaddik, he's only at the level of kinyan peiros, it's only that he can give over his thought, speech, and action, the products of his seichel and midas to Hashem. He can't give over the seichel and midas themselves, needs to know that the truth of the matter is he does have the ability to rule through waging a war, but he has the ability to rule over the thought, speech, and action, etc., but only of what he's practically doing involved in right now. He doesn't have the absolute control. He's not a balabayas. He doesn't have the ability to right now be giving over something that doesn't exist yet. The future thought, speech, and action. Meaning to say, if he makes a hachlota right now for the future that he's going to do a ma'aseh tov, a good deed, so the kinyan, the acquisition, didn't happen yet. In other words, there isn't that absolute certainty that that action will be done in the future in accordance to Hashem's will, because it's possible that something is going to come up. In the simple halachas of kinyan, we said that if you did that, you sold something of the future, that you could change your mind. In a similar way over here, in the meantime, we're saying it's possible that this person is going to change his mind. That is, because his guf, because his very essence of a seichel and midas were not given over to the Eibishter, because, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the essence of the ra, the essence of the bad, is still full force and never left, it never moved away at all. So every single time he needs to have another battle, another fight with the yetzer hara in his mind and heart, not to allow the taiva, the temptation, the desires of the yetzer hara to actually come down in thought, speech, and action. And therefore it's possible that if practically when this is going to come up in the future, his achlota that he made, perhaps the yetzer hara is going to overpower Rahman al-Litzlan and not allow this achlota tova to be carried out practically. So seemingly there's no way of giving over your future machshava dibur u'maisa. Says the Rebbe, nevertheless, there is a way of going about it. And the Rebbe says, even someone that can't hold by this level of kinyan haguf, that he completely gave over the essence of his midos in his heart and the desire in his mind to be given over to Hashem, but there is a way of giving over the fruits, those things that don't exist yet. And how is that? This is the concept that the Rambam was speaking about. Makne guf leperoisavi, giving over the guf, the essence, for the sake of the fruit, like in the case of giving the tree for the fruit. In other words, even though he didn't give over, he's not able to give over the guf to Hashem, but there is a way of giving over the guf as far as the results, the fruits of it. What does this mean practically? So the Rebbe explains The avodah of a Beinoni is in fact not limited only to his thought, speech, and action, to the garments, which we call the levushei hanefesh. Meaning to say that every single time he has a certain taiva, a certain desire or rotzoin aroused in his heart and in his mind, so every single time he needs to fight to make sure that this temptation or this rotzon does not actually come into machshava dibur u'maisa. Rather, the avodah is also that he does need to affect the seichel and midos himself. Meaning he has to somehow break, bend, at least make some sort of impression on the seichel and midos themselves, the ra inside of them, at least as far as what's relevant to what's going to eventually come out of this. In other words, the thought, speech, and action may result. As the Alter Rebbe explains, that when a Beinoni is davening, he's arousing a avas Hashem, a love of Hashem in a revealed way in his heart. And this has the impact that the ra, the evil in his heart, should then be like in a state of sleep, when a person is asleep. And this ava, the love that he has during davening, leaves an impression on the person for the rest of the day as well, to give him that strength to be able to overcome this ra that's trying to have the taiva. Especially, says the Rebbe, since the midah of ava of a Beinoni, when he's davening, he's doing it with an emes. As the Alter Rebbe quotes the pasuk on this, svas emes tikon la'ad, that something that's emes lasts forever. In other words, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, the Beinoni has the ability to arouse this ava to Hashem, and through that putting the Yetzer Hara to sleep. He has the ability to do this during his davening every single day. And therefore what follows this, says the Rebbe, that a Beinoni does have a certain power, rulership, control, even over the essence of the midas of the Yetzer Hara, but again, it's at least to the extent of affecting the future. Says the Rebbe, this will also help us understand and add explanation to what the Alter Rebbe says regarding the Beinoni. The Alter Rebbe says, like, that he never did an Aveira, and he never will do an Aveira. That means, because of his current situation right now, he's absolutely sure that lo yaver lo he will never do an Aveira, that even in the future, he will for sure be able to overcome the Yetzer Hara and not do any Aveira. Why? Because the Beinoni does have a certain power, a certain control over the midas of the Yetzer Hara. It's only that he doesn't have the control as far as the midas are for themselves in their very essence, but only as far as how they're going to impact, similar to the fruit, his thought, speech, and action. And says the Rebbe, so this is then this idea of makna haguf l'peirosav, to give over the body of something for the benefit of the fruit in avodas adam, which is telling us that even if a person is holding at that level, where he's not able to yet transform completely the essence of his midos in his heart, which would mean that he shouldn't even have a taiva at all. What he does have the ability, at least to bend, to break those midos to a certain extent, at least as far as that they shouldn't actually be able to come and express themselves. It's like the idea of having the fruit from the tree. And therefore, in that case, when you do go with that attitude of trying to get some sort of control over the midas themselves, so then the peiros, the fruits that are going to come out, the thought, speech, and action, even though they don't exist yet, could already be given over to Hashem. In other words, you could already say about him, lo yaver lo, in fact, he will never do the Aveira. In other words, says the Rebbe, this means that even though not every person could come to that level of the tzaddik, which is the level of the Eved Hashem, which is whole guf, the very essence of his seichel and midas are given over to Hashem. But every single yid is a shliach of Hashem, which has the koiches to carry out the purpose of creation, of making a dira lo yizbarach b'tachtenim, making a place for Hashem down here. Because he's a shliach of Hashem, and as we say, shluchai shel adam kamoisei, the shliach of a person is like him. In this case, we're applying it to the shliach of Hashem. He's kamayachal, similar to the one who sent him. And the Rebbe says, discussed a number of times, that the highest way of shlichus is that not only the actions of the shliach, or his ability, the power of action, or even not only those things are being attributed to the Mishaleach, in other words, they are representing the Mishaleach, but the idea of shluchah shalad kamoisi is saying that the whole mitzias, the whole existence of the shaliach is like the Mishaleach, like the sender, of b'derech mela, and therefore automatically what he does is going to be considered like the Mishaleach did it. So therefore, once again, every Yid really has this power of being the Shliach of Hashem. Nevertheless, as it's still not like the Eved, which the Eved, we said, is totally not a Metzias for himself at all. His whole guf belongs to the master, as opposed to the Shliach, even in the highest form of Shlichus, which we just explained, where the Shliach himself, not only his action or his ability to act, is like the Mishaleach. So again, it's still going to be only relevant as far as this particular Shlichus is concerned, like the idea of what we said before. It's guf liperoisav. He gave over his seichel it's for the sake of the actions that are going to come out, but not necessarily is it going to affect everything else. And therefore the Rebbe concludes from all of this is understood. What comes out is that every single Yid has the koyach of Hashem to give over, because the shliach of Hashem. So he has the koyach to give over his whole metzias to Hashem. In other words, to be a shliach of Hashem, to fulfill the whole purpose of creation. And through this, giving yourself generally over to Hashem, at least, in a way of guf leperois, of giving yourself over at least as far as what you're going to do, therefore, automatically, everything you're going to do and everything you're going to say and all your thoughts will be given over to Hashem, will be Hashem's in accordance with the Ratzon of the Mishaleach. Says the Rebbe, we now move to the next part of the Rambam. Here comes the Rambam. It says a greater chiddush. We said that the din of hekdesh is not the same as the din of an ordinary person in the way he acquires things. We said that if a person says that everything my animal will give birth to will be hekdesh, we said he has to fulfill his words. What does this mean in Avodah Ruchna? Says the Rebbe, we can explain it in the following way. Even if a person is not holding by this level we just discussed, to be able to even manage to do haguf leperoisav, to give over his body, or the seichel amidus for the sake of his actions being the way they're supposed to be. He doesn't have that complete mastery and rulership over the essence of his midas, the body of his midas, not even as far as the peiros are concerned. So seemingly now, there's no way of being makna, of giving over these fruits, in other words, your actions, that don't exist yet. And therefore, seemingly, we're back to what we said before, that every single time he's going to have to do an action, is going to be a new war with the Yetzer Hara, a new fight with the Yetzer Hara, that it should be the way Hashem wants. Says the Rebbe, but this is only true when we're speaking about Knias Hedyoit, the kinyan, the acquisition of a regular person. Which, as we said before, a regular person, there's no chiyuv, there's no mitzvah to give things away. In other words, what this would mean, avodas Hashem, is that hedyot over here would mean when we're dealing with divrei harashus, with our regular mundane things. But when we're speaking about the din of hekdesh, meaning kedushadika things, hachlotis toivus, matters of Torah and mitzvahs, which you're commanded, as we said before, by a din of hekdesh or tzedakah, you're commanded to fulfill whatever you said. So Torah and mitzvahs you definitely have to fulfill. So it's true that maybe the kinyan, the acquisition didn't happen completely through your achlota in the object. In other words, in that matter that you needed to do. Nothing changed yet. However, an obligation now applies to the person to fulfill what he promised. Like we said before, by a hekdesh, you have to fulfill your promises. And therefore, that also gives you the koyach. You have the obligation. That itself is going to give you the help and the assistance to be able to do it. The Rebbe explains. What is this referring to? These two different things now. So the Rebbe says, the mundane things of the person are mainly connected with the nature of his body, of his nefesh habahamis, which are the things that he has a desire for just because of his actual fact of existence, survival, etc. It's only that the nefesh or likis could make sure that even those actions are going to be done l'shem shamayim. But after all, these are still the mundane, regular things of the person. They are divrei harashus, they are activities that are guf-based, things related to our physical existence and bodies. Whereas in matters of Torah and mitzvahs, which are lechatchila from the outside, these are things coming from the neshama. It's only that the Yetzer Hara tries to get in the way of the yid to fulfill the mitzvah. So the way of doing the mitzvah is coming that the neshama has to fight or bend the Yetzer Hara, weaken the Yetzer Hara, so that the neshama should be able to fulfill its mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, so here we have the difference now between the hedyot, the ordinary things, or ordinary people, and hekdesh. When a person takes achlotas toivus and things that are more related to the mundane, to his physical body, which is more like the hedyot. So since these are things mainly coming because of the guf and the nefesh habahamis, the person does not have the control over the guf, over the very essence of the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, you cannot say that any obligation or shibud happened yet, that he's completely able to give it over because it's not really within his control. It doesn't exist yet, and it's coming from the guf. Whereas in Yom of Hekdesh, meaning Torah and mitzvahs, which are mainly activities from the neshama, all we need to do is just get rid of the disturbance of the Yetzer Hara. So the achlata toiva itself, coming from the neshama, that does obligate or mishabed the neshama to fulfill the achlata. So the truth of the matter is the kinyan didn't actually happen yet in the object. That can't be it, because it's still possible that the Yetzer Hara should try to get in the way, and therefore there's still no certainty of what's going to happen. But as far as the neshama is concerned, since it is ready by nature to do everything practically, so in other words, and those activities are within its power, so the neshama has that chiyuv to fulfill its words, even though it doesn't exist yet. It's, so to speak, something outside of its domain or outside of itself. And therefore, since there's a tzivui and chiyuv of the Torah to fulfill your obligations, but that also includes the help and assistance from above, that the neshama should be able to overcome all the blockages of the guf and to be able to carry out the hachlata in ma'asav hapoel. The Rebbe concludes that through being involved in the halachis of kinyan, we should be zoicha very speedily to the fulfillment of that promise that Hashem once again is going to go and liknos, acquire the remainder of his nation. It will be fulfilled that Yad Yaver Amzu Kanisa, that Hashem is acquiring the Yidden B'Shleimus. And through this, also the other kinyonim that the Mishnah speaks about, that Kana HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Olami, that Hashem acquires in his world. Till finally the kinyon of the Beis HaMikdash, which is one of the kinyonim mentioned over there, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi Sheyibana B'Meheira V'Yameinu Mamash.